Hey guys, today let's talk about the difference between center pivot and move pivot. A lot of beginners get this problem whenever they get into Maya for the very first time. So we're going to take a look at that and we are going to solve it. Pivot is one of the most important thing in Maya. When you are using Maya, you need to understand how to control your pivot. If not, at some point you are going to start having issues, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So let's quickly create a cube here. And when we talk about pivot, this is what is called the pivot, the axis. When you see mine is different, the default colors is no longer what I have here. But if you have the default colors, no worries. If you also have a different colors, no worries. This is what you use to control the object in your scene or models you have in your scene. Now, one thing you need to understand, or one thing I'm going to quickly point out before we proceed, if you have a smaller pivot in your object and you want to make it bigger, you can make use of the minus and the plus button to increase and decrease the size of the pivot. So I'm going to leave mine just like this. Okay, so now what is the difference between the move pivot and the center pivot? Yeah, well, it's straightforward. Moving pivot, it's when you manually move your pivot, and center pivot, it's when you center your pivot. Well, that might be a little bit confusing, but let me show you. Okay, so let's go into the face mode, and let's select this face of our object, and we hit on W. I hold on shift and drag to extrude. I hold on shift again and drag to extrude, and we go back into the object mode. So now when we click on this object, you can see that our pivot is no longer in the center. Anything we do here, so let's say we scale, it is going to scale from that particular direction, not from the midpoint. And if you want to do something like you want to work on this mid part of your object, there is no way you can do that because your pivot is at this point of your object. So how do you take this pivot back to the center of your object? Now, this is the center part of your object. I can't really point out the exact place that's the center of our object, but here, somewhere around here is the center of our object. So how do you take this pivot back to the center of your object? To reset this pivot, we have three ways of resetting these pivots. One, I really hate it very well, but I'm going to show you everything. So the one I always make use of is the shortcut. So when you want to reset your pivot, you just hit on D. When you hit on D, you right click and you hit on reset pivot, and it is going to take the pivot back to the center. Now, anything you do, you can see that it is currently scaling from the middle compared to what we have before. Now, another way you can reset this pivot is by going over to modify and look for the part that says center pivot. And when you click on that, it is going to center your pivot back to the midpoint of your object. And the last way which you can use to center the pivot that I said I hate the most is by making use of the shelf in Maya. Well, I deactivate the shelf. I created a shortcut which I can use to hide and enable the shelf. I feel like it takes some space in my Maya. That is why I always remove the shelf. So to reset the pivot, you just want to go over to this part here and hit on center pivot, and that is going to center the pivot for you. So whichever one you think you want to make use of, go ahead and make use of it, and this is how you can reset your pivot in Maya. Now let's take a look at how we can move our pivot in Maya. Moving of pivot in Maya, it's one thing you should really understand as a beginner or as a Maya user. Well, not everyone who uses Maya actually knows about this technique. So let's take a look at that. So how do you move pivot? Now, if you want to move pivot, it's still the same thing as editing the pivot, but this time you are not just going to edit the pivot and center it. You are going to edit the pivot and take it to the desired location which you want to. So we still have two ways of doing this. First, you have to go to your modeling toolkit, and when you go to your modeling toolkit, just hit on edit pivot, and when you hit on edit pivot, you are going to get this transform on your pivot. You have the option to move. This little square inside is for moving, while these are for rotating, and this is also for moving. The middle one inside is to move freely, and while these directions or axis are used to move it independently, or a particular axis which you want to move it. Now, if I want to move this to any part of my object, or let's say I want to take it away from my object, I can just click and drag it out of my object. Now you can see that it is no longer in my object. So if I hit on D, or I come back here and click on it to go out of the edit pivot mode, if I hit on R to scale, you can see where it is scaling from. But of course, this is not what you want. You have to just bring it back. So I'm going to reset it and take it back to the middle. Now, you can just move it anywhere. You can also rotate it. It depends on what you want to do. But the question is, what if you want to move this precisely? You can do that by making use of this axis controls you have here, but at the same time you might not be able to get exactly what you want or how you want to move this pivot in particular. So what if you want to move this pivot to any point of your model? So you want to move it to this part, to this vertex here, or you want to move it to this vertex here. How are you going to do that? Well, you can just drag it and bring it here, and yeah, that is it. It has moved. But hey, look at this. You see, it is completely off. So how can you really fix this? So I'm going to hit on D again and just reset this back to the center. Now, for you to be able to move your pivot and make it go to a particular direction, it's what we call snapping in Maya. So once you go into the pivot mode, you need to enable snapping. Snapping is really helpful. Before you are able to snap your pivot in Maya, you need to make sure that you are in the pivot mode. And when you are in the pivot mode, hold the V key on your keyboard. And when you hold the V key on your keyboard, when you click and drag, you are going to snap into points. Take a look at it. Now, when we rotate our model, you can see that it is snapping into point, as you can see here. So now the question is, how can you really use this? How is this necessary? Why do you need to understand this? Or why do you really need to know this technique in Maya? Or why do you need to snap your pivot or move your pivot? Well, so many questions, but it has only one answer, and I'm going to show you that. So let's go back into the object mode and let's delete this cube. And then let me just go into my outliner. So I'm going to right click, create another cube, and I'm also going to right click and then shift right click and create another cube. I'm going to hit on W and move this out here. Okay, now let's say I want to snap these two cubes together. I want them to hit the edge of each other. How can I really achieve this? Well, you can achieve it. Yeah, you can. You can just make use of the axis, click, drag, and drop it here. Wow, you did a nice job. But the question is, how can you tell that you perfectly snap these two cubes together at that particular edge where you want to snap them? Well, that might be complicated. It's something you might not understand if you do it properly or not. You won't be able to see that. Or do you want to go into the wireframe mode, and you want to go into wireframe mode and start moving this, zooming in closely and try to make sure you snap this and so on? Ask yourself the question, how long is this going to take you to achieve? Do you want to keep doing something like this? Well, that is where manually moving your pivot comes in handy. This is what you are going to do. So for us to fix this issue, we just need to hit on D to go into our pivot mode, and we're going to hold down V, and we're going to drag this pivot and snap it to one of all these edges here. Now you can see, and we're going to hit on D to go out of the pivot mode. Now what we want to do is to snap this edge over to this edge here, so that our cube are going to be touching each other perfectly. So to do that, you just want to hold down the V key on your keyboard. When you hold down the V key on your keyboard, you can see what is going on here. You can see that this square you have in the middle of your pivot has turned to an ellipse. So now when you hold down the V key on your keyboard, when you click on any axis and you drag, you can see it just snap directly. Of course, it's not just going to snap once there, so you just have to keep trying and trying and trying. But this just snapped once for me, and I can't really tell why it happens that way, but That is just the use of snapping. So in case you are modeling and you want to just make any model snap to any particular edge or any particular point of your model, this is how you can do it. So now once you are done with that, so let's say we snap. So once we are done snapping, you want to reset the pivot, just hit on D, right click, reset pivot, or you go to your shelf, reset pivot, or you go to modify and then you center the pivot. And once you are done, always make sure to hit on D to go out of the pivot mode. Well, that brings us to the end of today's tips. If this really help you understand how to manually move your pivot and center your pivot and tell you the difference between move and centering of pivot, and also help you understand when and where to make use of all these techniques, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Not just the subscribe button, ring the bell icon so that you, my friend, don't miss any new tips and tricks I will be posting every week. And don't forget to check out the Telegram channel. Link in the link is in the description. So I'm going to see you guys in my next video. Make sure that you stay creative.